Good morning. Good morning. It's good to see you all here today. And This morning we have the pleasure of welcoming back Sustama Smyth, leader of the community of Amida Buddhists in the UK, and a practicing psychotherapist. I think perhaps all of you are familiar with Sustama from her previous visits to our group, and we welcome her back today to discuss, quite appropriately, on this Valentine's Day, the topic of love. Thank you so much for being here, Sustama, and just give me a moment to adjust here. And I spin. There we go. Very good.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's lovely to see you all again. Lovely to be here. Yeah. So, yes, I thought I'd call my talk today a call to loving, and this is to mark Valentine's Day. So I thought it would be very appropriate to speak about love, loving kindness. So, not as a sentiment, though, not as a preference, not love as something we feel when conditions are right, but loving as a call that comes from suffering itself and that reaches us before we know how to respond. When we hear the word love, most of us feel we understand it. We love our families, of course, our partners, our friends. We care about the world. We want people to be safe and well. But today, I'd like us to pause here. What do we really mean by love? What do we really mean by compassion? Because in the Dharma, compassion is not simply a feeling. It's not a virtue we achieve. It's not something we manufacture from our own goodness. It's a response to suffering so deep that it reshapes how we exist. So I'd like to bring in Shinran Shonin here. So Shinran was a 13th century Japanese teacher and founder of the Jodo Shinshu Pure Land tradition. And he spoke from the perspective of an ordinary person, deeply aware of his own limitations and on reliance on Amida Buddha's compassion. So I'd like to read a verse from Shinran's Shozo Matsu, and this is Wasan number 98. Lacking even small love and small compassion, I cannot hope to benefit sentient beings. Were it not for the ship of Amida's vow, how could I cross the ocean of painful existence? Shinran does not say, my compassion is imperfect. He doesn't say, I'll try my best. He says, I lack even small love and small compassion. At first, this sounds awful, but this isn't self-condemnation. It's clarity, it's honesty. We could also change the line, were it not for the ship of Amida's vow, to, were it not for the ship of the Buddha's compassion. At the moment, my Sangha, which meets every Tuesday, is reading Songs of Light by George Gattenby. He's a Shin Buddhist minister, and his reflections on Shinran's writings are brilliant and clear. So in his commentary for this particular Wasan, he reminds us that love and compassion are central to the bodhisattva path. As we all know, that's the path towards Buddhahood. And yet, he suggests that in our time, these words have become diluted. We use them constantly, casually. We assume we know what they mean. But in Buddhism, compassion corresponds to what Shinran calls the ocean of painful existence. An ocean here is not a small word. It means depth without measure. So like the ocean, we know that there are creatures that exist within it, even if we never see them. We're aware of the ocean's forceful waves and movement that are beyond our control. The ocean's complexity on how it circulates and regulates the Earth's temperature is beyond comprehension. And similarly, the suffering of beings is vast, interconnected, endless. And so the compassion that responds to it must be equally vast. In the Jataka stories, so these are stories or accounts of the Buddha's previous lives as a bodhisattva. We read stories about this radical compassion. So in these stories, the bodhisattva gives everything: comfort, safety, body, even life, but not as heroism. Because in these stories, the concern is for others' suffering. Giving, or dana, is not simply generosity. It's the expression of non-self. It's how we can live compassion. To be compassionate in this sense is to be so deeply identified with suffering beings that one's life naturally becomes an offering. I also heard it said another way. We need to love more. We need to love the trees. We need to love the rivers and the animals as if they were me. But actually, we need to love the trees because they're trees, the rivers because they're rivers. And we don't. We love this thing called me more. And when we hear this, Shinran's words begin to make sense. Compared to this boundless compassion, our everyday loves are small because they're shaped by attachment, by preference, by fear, by self-reference. We love those close to us. We love and protect what matters to us. We help, but often conditionally. And yet, Shinran doesn't reject our humanity. Our kindness, sympathy, concern, even if they're small, these are still beautiful and necessary. The only difference here is that they are not yet the compassion of a Buddha, because the compassion of a Buddha is free from attachment. It's the complete giving of oneself for all beings. And Shinran sees this clearly. This is beyond his human capacity. So he turns not inward to self-effort, but outward to entrusting what we call other power, or Amida Buddha, or you could say the Sambhogakaya, in other words, the enjoyment body of the Dharma. So were it not for the ship of Amida's vow, or, like I said earlier, we could replace it and say, were it not for the ship of the Buddha's compassion to teach the Dharma for the sake of all sentient beings, how could I, this little me, cross the ocean of painful existence? If the path depended on our ability to generate perfect compassion, we would remain stranded. We would have to wait a long time before we could even begin. But the Buddha's compassion is the ship. So when Pure Land Buddhists say Namo Amida Bu, this practice is not their effort to become compassionate. It's an expression of trusting that the Buddha's compassion is already there. reaching those who are suffering, namely us. I would now like to bring in another strand of teaching that resonates deeply with this. Joan Sutherland's reflections on the Vimalakirti Sutra. I think some of you may have heard of Joan Sutherland before, being a Zen Buddhist, and you might even have heard some of her commentary when Will gave his teachings on the Vimalakirti Sutra. So, if you don't know, Joan Sutherland Roshi is an American Zen teacher who works with koans. And my spiritual friend Bhaktika and I have been talking about doing a study group on her commentary on Vimalakirti Sutra because it's very good. In Vimalakirti's world, awakening does not happen apart from life. It happens right in the middle of it. So this world, exactly as it is the field of awakening. And this world is marked by suffering. So because we live in it, we suffer. But this is not to be seen as some kind of weakness. This is our strength. So the willingness to stay with suffering, or like Bernie Glassman's Peacemakers, to bear witness to it, to listen to it, to not turn away, is the beginning of wisdom. And Quan Shi Yin, the bodhisattva of compassion, is described as the one who hears the cries of the world. She doesn't come to offer solutions. She doesn't judge. She doesn't say, "Oh, you're all right. I don't know what you're worried about." She doesn't explain our feelings away using cold logic. She listens. She listens without rushing to certainty, without imposing conclusions, without filtering everything through her own fears and prejudices. She doesn't make it about herself. This kind of listening requires us not to know. It requires us to remain open to another person's perspective, to let the world speak. And when we truly listen, we begin to understand more deeply. We begin to see from multiple perspectives. And from that understanding, compassionate action can arise, but not as a reaction, not as an ideology, but as a response. So you could say responsibility here is our ability to respond because we have spent some time listening with our heart. In my therapy practice, I sometimes get clients who want a solution. And what's wonderful about Buddhism is Quan Shi Yin has given us the practice of listening with our heart as a solution. When we really listen to our feelings or another person's feelings, and I should caveat this by saying that we're not listening to our feelings as if we need to believe them to be true or that they're our God and we need to act on them, but as a way to listen to validate how we or someone else feels by listening with empathy and understanding. We allow ourselves or the other person to be seen as a precious human being with a right to be respected. So compassion is not about escaping suffering. We often speak of greed, hatred, and delusion as poisons. Well, they are. They're the three poisons in Buddhism. They create suffering. But if we imagine the path of loving as eliminating them entirely, we create another problem. We divide ourselves into pure and impure, spiritual and unspiritual. And then problems can arise because look at me, I'm doing all the work. Why aren't you doing the work? Come on, not fair. And then the whole cycle of conflict arises again. So most of us know from experience, like waves in the ocean, these forces do not simply disappear. The deeper teaching is transformation, where greed transforms and becomes generosity. So instead of, I want, what's in it for me? We then give, what do I have to give? Hatred becomes clarity and a fierce care for light. So instead of rejecting, pushing things away, we then see how we can see how to make connections. Delusion transforms to wisdom. And from a Pure Land perspective, wisdom is seeing that we are this way, full of greed, hate, and delusion. And it's also transforming into insight that something much greater than us, like the Dharma, has always been there, even before we realized there was such a thing as the Dharma. It has always been there and it will always be there, something that the Buddha himself discovered and not created. So these three poisons are not something to be got rid of. They are to be understood, worked with, and transformed. Our very entanglement becomes the ground of awakening. And this resonates with Shinran's insight. He doesn't pretend to be free of limitations. He accepts his reality as an ordinary human being, full of attachment, full of contradiction, and blindness, ignorance. And in that acceptance, the Buddha's compassion becomes real. So you could say that for us Pure Land practitioners, Namo Amidabu is spoken not by the perfected person, but by the one who knows their limitations. And this practice isn't done to become perfect, but practiced to continually remind us and reassure us that we are accepted because of them. So if we never reach enlightenment, that's okay. We're still carried by Amida's love. Shinran goes on to indicate that we are being carried despite, no, not despite, but because of our greed, hate, and delusion. So not after we eliminate them, but because of them. And gradually transformation happens. We begin to see our anger clearly. We notice our grasping. We recognize our confusion. And seeing this itself becomes wisdom. There's another dimension to this call to loving, that becomes clearest when something terrible is happening. When life is calm, loving can remain abstract. It can stay as an idea. But when suffering erupts, when grief, fear, and violence move through a community, loving becomes visible. It becomes concrete. It shows up in hands, in voices, in bodies, and in presence. And we have, something really awful happening in your country at the moment. And because of it, there's a wave of loving action happening as well. So just after Alex Pretty was killed by ICE agents in Minnesota, I happened to read a Substack post by a local Minnesotan woman by the name of Terry about things that it moved me to tears, and which is probably outdated now because the call to loving in Minnesota has gained momentum. But I'd still like to share what she wrote the day after he died. It wasn't just about grief, but of how people responded to one another. So she wrote, a donut shop became a warming and medical center for those keeping vigil. A 70-year-old bookstore owner walked through tear gas to stand with his neighbors, and the community responded with overwhelming support. A small church quietly cleaned the streets at dawn so residents wouldn't wake up to the debris of violence. An injured journalist returned to walk alongside tens of thousands in sub-zero temperatures. A small business transformed into a donation hub. Restaurants raised money for families sheltering in place. Tow truck drivers offered their services freely. Spiritual leaders organized sit-ins for relief and accountability. Social workers opened their homes to children suddenly alone. Animal shelters cared for abandoned pets. Mothers stood watch at bus stops in freezing temperatures before going home to tuck their own children into bed. And more loving actions have been developing since, and the list is long and heartwarming. Though these aren't perfect actions, they're not pure actions, they're not heroic in any sense, but they are human responses to suffering. And this is loving as it actually appears in the world, not as a sentiment, but as showing up, as refusing to abandon one another. When something breaks the heart open, compassion becomes immediate. We don't ask, am I being compassionate enough? How do I look now? We ask, what is needed right now? This is what transformation looks like. This is where the energy of fear becomes protection. The energy of anger becomes advocacy. The energy of grief becomes care. Greed, hatred, and delusion are not erased. They're transformed, redirected, humanized, and opened. This is wisdom functioning in real time. Joan Sutherland speaks about the importance of staying with the world as it is, of bearing witness without rushing to fix, judge, or explain. And from that witnessing, compassionate action emerges that is grounded, relational, and responsive. When we listen deeply to suffering, we are changed by it. And in that change, loving kindness appears. A donut shop becomes a sanctuary. A bookstore becomes a place of solidarity. A church becomes a quiet caretaker of memory. Parents become guardians of the neighborhood. Neighbors become lifelines. Community becomes the body of compassion. This is Quan Chi Yin in action. Not a distant and abstract figure, but the many-armed, many-voiced presence of people listening to the cries of the world and responding in the ways that they can. And perhaps this is what Shinran also saw. We may lack perfect compassion. We may lack the boundless love of a Buddha. But in the presence of suffering, something moves through us. And in those moments, loving becomes unmistakably real. Not because suffering has disappeared, but because no one is facing it alone. So the call to loving is simply this: to accept this world as a world of suffering and to not turn away, to recognize our own entanglement and to not despair, to listen deeply like Quan Chi Yin, to bear witness before acting, to allow understanding to shape compassion, and to trust that even in our limitations, the great compassion is already at work. We do not cross the ocean alone. We are carried. And when we can entrust ourselves, loving kindness appears in small, quiet, and ordinary ways. Patience, a willingness to listen, a softening of judgment, a readiness to see things from another perspective. This is how bodhisattvas are formed. Not by escaping the world, but by remaining present within it. Namo Amida. Thank you very much. Now we can open up for discussion.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, Sustama, for that discussion on love that we all, I'm sure, appreciate it. And let me remove the pin so that we can all be equally present here. And we will stop the recording.